Hi all, in this example I'm going to demonstrate a null reference exception. In order to do that, I'm using C# to begin with, and I've created a console application. In this console application, I've also created a class called person, and this class has two fields, name and last name, and it also has properties that allow you to access those private fields. And additionally, I also created the main class, which is the one that we will run when we hit at F5, we will run. And in the main method of the class, I've created an object called persons, a list of objects really, and with a type person, which is this class that I've created here. And I also create an object called person, which is basically we'll try and look for a person named Lee in the list of persons that we have above here, and then we will write that the result of the name of the person that we found in the console. And this looks fine. There are no syntax errors, so it should run fine. So what you will see here, during runtime, you will get an error which I will demonstrate now. So I'm going to hit F5 to run my application. And so another great strategy when debugging is to put breakpoints, because breakpoints allow you to step through the code. You can put breakpoints just before where you get the error, just before where you get the error, or you can put them in the beginning of your of your method if you don't know exactly where the error is coming from. So I'm going to step through the code. As you can see, the yellow there shows where the debugger is actually is. So I'm going to hit F10. So we've created the list of persons. Now we're going to do a search of a person named Lee. And so we're going to display the name of the person. As you can see, we have gotten a null reference exception because we try to access person when person is actually null. And if you hover over your object, you can see that person is null. So Visual Studio, if you are a C# developer, is a great tool to debug with, because it makes it so easy. But and other things that you have in this example, all the local variables that are within the scope are displayed there, and you can see that persons, there's nothing in persons list. The count is 0 and the person was not found, so it's null. And so now and so this just demonstrates that I could not find that, but I tried to print it even though it was null, hence the error. So I'm going to fix that by doing a check before I access person to check if person is not null, okay? So in C#, the brackets or the curly brackets, they denote a scope. So the first thing that my application, once I do a search, the first thing that it's going to do is going to check, did we return any person by the name of Lee? If it does, then it's going to show, it's going to get in here, else it's going to say that it didn't find it. So this time I'm not even going to put a breakpoint, I'm just going to run as is. So the person by the name of Lee was not found. So I'm going to run that again with a breakpoint this time to show that how it makes the decisions. So it's if a person, and as you can see person is null, so it's not going to go there, it's going to go to the else statement without failing, and voila, the exception now is gone. Now I'm going to show the same example but with the at least one person initialized so that it can find the person. So here I've created again the object persons, which is a list, and I'm going to paste this because to make it quick. So person, in the persons list I've added a new person by the name Lee Smith, okay, and I've also modified my class person to have a constructor that takes two string variables, and so so now at this point we should be successful. So if you look at person is no longer null. We have a person with the name Smith, Lee, and the last name Smith. And again, depending on the tool that you're using to debug, you might be able to do this stepping through the program. Most IDEs allow you to see the values, and so you shouldn't have an issue there unless you are using very basic IDE. And so right there it was able to find, and again no issues. So my name is Lee was found, so I'm going to stop this here. So the next thing that we want to demonstrate is another way to another thing that I could have done here. If I didn't have a fancy IDE like this one, I could have said, okay, I have a null person. I could have said, okay, I could have written everything that my application is doing either in a file or on the screen. So I could do something like this. This is basically how you would trace your application. You trace the activity where it stopped, then you would know exactly where the issue happened. So I would do something like created a list of persons, and then I could then say, let's remove this to, let's comment it out actually, so that it does not interfere. So I could say here, so I've created a list of person. I could then say console dot write line searching for person Lee, and then I would say, again, let me comment this out so as to demonstrate. Let's comment everything out here as to demonstrate the accessing that without checking if it's null. So then I honestly really just need something like this. Okay, so now I'm going to run it without stepping through it. I'm just going, because if you don't have a debugger like this where you are able to step through, then printing stuff out either to the console or to a file is your best way to trace your application to see where it actually fails. So it's failing, and of course, because this is an IDE, it's showing that it had to basically stop. But you can see here in our console, it wrote out, created a list of persons, and it's searching for person Lee, and immediately after that it blew up. So you would know in your application that, okay, I traced up to here, and when it got to this stop where it was supposed to write the next line, which is success, it couldn't get to that. So you would look at the code and see Okay, so I was trying to write success here. The only code that couldn't run was this. Then I would know just by looking at my trace that my code, this code was not breached. So that's another way of doing it. Another way is, of course, using a, let me think. So another way is to use exception handling. In real world, you need to be able to pinpoint where the issue is. So logging, tracing are your friends when it comes to debugging, because most of the time, in fact, when you are in the maintenance stage, when things are in production, you will not have the luxury of debugging your application in real time. So you rely on logs, and you rely on you rely on logs. So tracing your application in verbose mode, for instance, so that if something happens, you can say to the people who host your application, please turn on verbose mode of logging, and the logs should tell you exactly what happened. So it's very, very important part of debugging to log what your application does, so that you can easily access the error. So this time I'm going to add what we call an exception handling, and in .NET C Sharp we use a try catch block. Okay, catch the exception. So I could leave it like this by default, and I don't want to go into explaining how exception handling works in .NET, but basically, because I have just the catch statement, it already knows that that's an exception. But in order for me to access that, then I would have to specify a variable, meaning that when you hit an error, catch it into this variable so that I can access it here. So I'm going to say console dot write line e dot message. I would say message. Okay, and I could also write the stack trace in my log file and say e dot stack trace. Actually, if I just do to string, it will give me the stack trace. Okay, now when I run, oh sorry, this is supposed to be in here. Let's move this down here. Okay, so basically it's saying here, like, it couldn't find that variable because I defined it here in this scope. Okay, and so now I'm going to run it again. I'm going to put my my breakpoint here, so that if an error happens, it will stop when it gets to this block. Okay, so right there you can see it got an error, so it stopped where I had my my breakpoint. And so I'm going to run it, and it's going to say created a list of persons, searching for a person Lee, message object reference not set to an instance of an object. And it tells me in the stack trace that this was a system null reference exception, and it tells me the line. Hopefully the debugger that you'll be using will be as powerful as this one. But again, let me show you one last time. I'm going to make it fancy. Okay, so this time I'm not putting any breakpoints because I'm in production, and in production there are no breakpoints, right? So I'm going to do a start, and right there it tells me exactly what happened. There was an object reference not set to an instance of an object. It was able to create the list of persons. It tried to search for person Lee, and it got an error. So again, this is just another way to allow your application to run through without stopping everything. Okay. And again, if I uncomment this out, we should run successfully. Without any issues. So created a list of persons, searching for person Lee. Person by the name of Lee was not found. Success. So this time we ran fine without any issues. So now I'm going to put back where we add Lee to the list so that Lee can be found. And as you can see, sorry, I just hit F5 there, which is why it went pretty fast. So I've created a list of persons, searching for person Lee, and my name is Lee. Success. So everything is good. So again, this was just an example which shows all the debugging ways you can debug your application. Trace is very, very important because it tells you exactly where you stop, and you can go back to your code and look and see, okay, what line did it stop, by just searching the comments. And you can then know exactly where the issue is, and again you can catch exceptions. And I don't want to go into detail with the exception, but you can catch other specific exceptions depending on the language that you depending on the language that you are using. Okay, so in C# again, you can catch specific errors before you default to this exception and say something like console.writeLine e.message, and let's do this here. Shall we could have copied this whole thing. Let's do this. And so I'm going to run it, and again, no issues there. I hope this was helpful enough to understand the whole debugging process, at least using this example of a null reference. I'm sure there is a myriad of help out there on how to debug your application, but what I want you to take away is that there are things you can do to avoid your application being stopped from executing, by making sure that you check your variables to prevent issues, and also that you handle exceptions in a graceful manner, and you also use all the strategies available to debug during implementation and testing, and also to debug during maintenance period. Thank you.